It is my pleasure to have the opportunity to stand with chief guests who, as a product of this Winston-Salem Forsyth County school system and a native of this city, who was inspired by Engine 4. And I'm sure he will share his concerns and comments about that. I was so impressed when I reviewed all of the history about Engine 4. And I was very happy to know that 8 men had the enthusiasm and the know-how to brave a trail that was a difficult one. I guess they said many times, ride on, no man can hinder me. Because in their efforts, the journey they took became a historical event for all of us. And I felt that this moment should be seized and captured. So as public safety chairman, I am sure when individuals will look at this history, our city of Winston-Salem will be very proud of the accomplishment and the torch that these men carried. Engine 4 firemen.
It was in 1962 when I visited Engine 4 as a second grader, meeting these men for the very first time. I was so impressed and so thrilled about what they did that in 1977, it was Lester Irvin, who was then deputy fire chief, who actually offered me employment with the Winston-Salem Fire Department. And from that time on, I was mentored, led, directed, and inspired by these gentlemen who worked at Engine 4. Engine 4, their personnel, they were a light in our community. They were the heartbeat of the community that I grew up in. And I'm so thankful that I have this opportunity to say thank you and just say, Engine 4, you were my inspiration.
Southern Community Bank and Trust is proud to sponsor Engine 4, the story of North Carolina's first integrated firehouse. Through the film production of this landmark event, we will pay tribute to a courageous group of firemen. The 8 black firemen and 7 white firemen of Engine 4 were trailblazers who showed the world that our community was willing to join together as one and defy the social conventions of their day in the pursuit of a greater good. Today, that same progressive spirit continues to thrive in modern-day Winston-Salem. At Southern Community Bank and Trust, we celebrate our 10-year anniversary of the founding of our financial institution in Winston-Salem, which could not have happened without the support of this tremendous community that we live in. In keeping with our commitment from day one to give back a percentage of our profits to the communities that we serve, we are proud to support this endeavor to memorialize one of the most significant events of its time. At Southern Community, we encapsulate our corporate philosophy in the phrase, small enough to care. While we coined the phrase to emphasize our approach to banking, this phrase embodies the true spirit of our community and those brave men of Engine 4 that blazed the trail before us.
Well, I think it was a mission that we had to fulfill. And I think when the 8 of us were selected, we had to be pioneers. And we had to be the men who would come through and make the way possible for these other fellows who had come behind us.
The chief said, a black man can't be a fireman. I frowned, what do you mean you can't be a fireman? Anybody can be anything if you train them.
As a company, we overcame a lot of hostility and a lot of hardship, but in all, it was fun. Even when we knew what was against us and how it would be, we made it a fun thing and we made it work.
When we first started answering alarm with white guys, they would be in a bunch over here and we'd be over here. But later, show you how danger can bring you together. And this is what happened, that we wound up smoking cigarettes together. One didn't have the cigarettes. I don't smoke cigars, I'm a cigar smoker. But ones didn't have cigarettes, they would pass cigarettes around. And if you run out of cigarette, here, give me a draw of that. And a white guy reached over and gave me, smoked the same cigarette. And that's what danger will do for a human being, whether you green or red, if you're together. Thank you, Lord. Thank you, Jesus.
I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up, live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal.
12 years before the March on Washington. 9 years before the sit-in at Greensboro. 3 years before Brown versus Board of Education. Integration came to a North Carolina firehouse. It came through an improbable alliance of a black college professor, a populist white politician, and the city's business elite. It came despite the opposition of the fire department hierarchy, and it worked. 8 black firemen and 7 white firemen, 8, laughed, worshiped, and worked together. They ignored the social conventions of their day and forged a bond that endured the rest of their lives. But the experiment did not last. Within 8 years, the integrated firehouse became an all-black firehouse. Complete integration would come 10 years later. But the trail had been blazed peacefully by the men who served on Engine 4. It was the prelude to the civil rights movement that transformed the nation. Black Americans serving in the armed forces during World War II and at home in industries that supported the war vowed to become full participants in the democracy they were fighting to defend. In Winston-Salem, North Carolina, that determination found voice among the workers at the R.J. Reynolds Tobacco Company.
Conditions were really very tough in those factories, particularly in the black departments. There was no air conditioning. It was extremely hot. The machinery was fairly dangerous. The foremen were all white men. Many of the African American employees were women. The white men were used to really being able to rule those factories, in part by just verbal threats and verbal assaults as a way of keeping people working.
On a muggy day in June 1943, a protest at one of R.J. Reynolds' plants sparked a series of events that would forever change the city. It began after a black employee collapsed and died on the spot.
It was during the war, so the company was really trying to push maximum production, so they'd been working them really hard. The women decided to stage a sit-down strike. Their only intent really was to get to talk to the foreman and say, look, we can't work this hard. The conditions are too tough in here. This is what caused this man to die. That sit-down strike then spread the next day to all of the black departments, and within a matter of several hours, the production at Reynolds had come to a halt.
To end the strike, Reynolds allowed the workers to form Local 22 of the United Tobacco Workers. The union's influence soon spread beyond the factory.
One of the first things they realized was that just having power in the factory wasn't going to be enough. So right from the beginning, the union started thinking about voting and voter registration, about how they could translate this economic power at the workplace into political power in the larger Winston-Salem community.
The NAACP and the Baptist Ministers Conference soon joined forces with the union by escorting African Americans registering to vote.
When we got in there, the clerks were drinking Cokes, and they didn't pay no attention to us. We stood there, and finally, one lady came and asked what we wanted. She ought to know we was there to And we told her, and she went back and whispered something to one of the ladies there, and they went in the back there, and they stayed about an hour and something, and we didn't. We still stand there.
They would go down en masse to the voter registration and really demand their right to be registered. And it took several times before the white registrars realized that they had more than they could handle here, and they opened the books up. And within several years, the union was able to put 2,000 to 3,000 workers on the voting books in Winston-Salem, and that began to translate into real political power.
No African American had held office in the South since the start of the Jim Crow era at the turn of the century. But that changed in 1947 with the election of Kenneth R. Williams, a professor at Winston-Salem Teachers College.
We finally reached the conclusion that Dr. Williams was the best black representative that we could put up because he was respected, and we felt that you had to have a black on there who was respected.
He was young, he was a veteran, he was a minister, he was well educated, and he had been supportive of the unionization efforts.
On the board, Williams kept a low profile. He carefully picked his issues, such as a ward realignment plan that placed all black voters in one oversized ward. The plan was approved over Williams' objections. Towards the end of his first term, Williams brought up a new issue. It concerned the city's plan to build a new fire station.
Mr. Mayor, what I want to say does not demand any action, but when that fire station is built, I would like to see the board take some stand on moving the personnel from the fire station on Dunleith Avenue, just south of 3rd Street, and integrating Negro citizens into the fire department, and perhaps subsequently letting that station be manned by Negro firemen.
He just thought it was something that was a good fit for Winston-Salem and something that needed to be done and was the right thing. I get no sense from people I've talked to and my conversations with him that it was, a cutting-edge decision that we're going to make Winston-Salem first, or, nobody else is doing this. I just think he felt, in his heart that it was the right thing to do.
In 1941, the city hired its first black police officer to work in African-American neighborhoods, but firefighters live in close quarters for 24 hours at a time. Integrating the fire service would be much harder.
I think his first approach was to get a black fireman into the fire department. I think was his first approach to it. And nobody wanted to step out on that limb by themselves. So, I think that kind of formed and shaped the way he pursued it after that. Then if I can't find a person, then let's do a whole fire station.
African Americans had a long and proud tradition as firefighters. In southern colonies, black slaves and freedmen alike served in fire companies in Savannah and Charleston. Fires were fought with hoses fed from a tub pumped by 2 men. It was hard work. In the late 1800s, steam fire engines and ladder wagons pulled by horse relieved firemen of much of their physical labor, but African Americans could still be found in most of the city fire departments. They were skilled teamsters and were kept as drivers, but that changed with the advent of motorized fire trucks.
Winston apparently didn't keep the black firefighters after the horses went out, and after they no longer needed manual labor to get the equipment to the fire scene. Basically over North Carolina and over most of the South, probably by 1920, most of the volunteer black fire companies were gone.
Williams' proposal to hire black firemen was sent to the Ordinance Committee, where it stalled. 3 months later, the city held elections. The outcome would be decisive in the push to integrate the fire department. On the ballot for mayor was Marshall Curfews, a white populist and political maverick. Curfews had once been arrested for public drunkenness while running for office, just to make the point that Winston-Salem was not the dry town others pretended it to be. In 1949, he was 44 years old, a former candy salesman who had made a hobby of running for elective office. Since 1934, he had run 3 times for the State House, once for Congress, and 3 times for mayor, all without success.
Character is the word that always comes to the forefront. I think the newspaper at one time called him a gadfly. Curfews was a perennial office seeker, and nobody really took him very seriously. He was just one of those kind of colorful people that makes good press, and I think that's probably why the newspaper covered him so much.
He was certainly a working class person in every sense of the word for a town like Winston-Salem. He knew a lot of African American people. People were comfortable with him, as were white workers. So he, in a way, was again a kind of an ideal candidate that year.
In 1947, Curfews had placed a distant third in the Democratic primary. This time, with the support of Local 22 and the NAACP, he easily defeated the incumbent mayor. On June 13, 1949, Curfews was sworn in as Winston-Salem's 10th mayor. Several months later, he received a letter from the Baptist Ministers' Conference urging him to hire black firefighters. Behind the scenes, the city's powerful white business establishment was quietly urging Curfews to do the same.
Winston-Salem at that time was completely and absolutely controlled by the business leaders, Reynolds, Haynes, Wachovia. And all of the progress that was made in desegregation was done because of the support of those leaders.
A few weeks later, the Reverend Jerry Drayton and other black leaders requested a meeting with the city's business elite. They gathered after hours in a conference room high in the Reynolds Tower.
Well, in that meeting, Mr. C.C. Ross and Charles McLean, who was the field representative of the NAACP, requested that Mr. James G. Haynes and Mr. Wallington Whitaker, those were the key leaders that we dealt with. They requested that, and they told us that they would work on it, and which they did. That's the way it was done.
Gentlemen, I'd like to offer the following motion for your consideration due to the fact that it is Good Friday and 40% of our population is colored. Be it resolved by the Board of Aldermen of the City of Winston-Salem that it is in the public interest that the city manager and the chief of the fire department should employ, as soon as practicable, well-qualified young men to serve at Fire Station Number 4, located on Dunleith Avenue in East Winston. And the city manager and the chief of the fire department are directed to proceed accordingly. Such newly employed firemen will be trained and directed by present fire personnel. For your information,
Curfews' motion was met with silence. Then, without a word of discussion, the board voted it down 5-3. After the vote, Williams promised to bring the issue up again.
This is a blow to me and to every Negro citizen in Winston-Salem who is trying to make this a decent place to live. There is no reason under the sun why a situation like has been proposed of putting Negroes in the fire department can't work in a city that is as liberal as Winston-Salem. Other cities have had Negro firemen, and from all indications, Richmond will have them very shortly. It worked when we had Negro firemen years ago. The fellows worked for no pay at all, and everybody said that they rendered good service. Integration in the police department is working, and I just don't feel like the board tonight has given the Negro citizen a fair deal.
The Winston-Salem Journal endorsed hiring black firemen, drawing the ire of the aldermen who were opposed.
This is one of the first times that the aldermen go public with an issue. They were very concerned about showing a united front. Alderman Kirby and Lancaster issued a joint statement that they were strongly against what Curfews was trying to do, that he was trying to railroad this through, and it was not in the best interest of the city and not what the city should be doing.
In the battle for public opinion, Kirby and Lancaster had a powerful ally in Fire Chief Milton G. Brown, who was adamantly opposed to hiring blacks.
One of the statements he made one time was the fact that blacks couldn't make good firemen. And if they wanted another company over there, he would just go up to Yadkinville and get him a bunch of volunteers and bring them there and train them and let them be volunteer firemen.
Brown was old school. He had come up through the ranks joining the department in 1912, and the way that you became an officer in the fire department was not necessarily that you were the best, maybe that you'd been here the longest, but you had the respect of other firefighters.
He had very little, and this is not a reflection on anybody, but he had very little training, education, and but he had the experience, in which back then, that's what most of it was about. The ones that had the experience of fighting fire, they the one that made it.
When he became chief, those same type of rules, that being tough and this is the way we've done it, policy and procedure was we've always done it this way, is what Brown believed in, and he carried that into his administration as the fire chief for a number of years. When it came to something as major a change as bringing in African Americans into the fire department, of course he was opposed to it because it necessitated change, and Brown by nature was opposed to change.
Despite the public opposition of the fire chief and the majority of the board, Curfews and Williams continued to be supported by the city's powerful business leaders.
Those business leaders were interested in the image of the city, you see, okay. And some of us, including myself, had been in some southern cities where they had hired black firemen and black policemen. And we told them that Winston-Salem we thought was progressive enough to do it.
They're operating in a national and international environment. They're selling their cigarettes. They're projecting an image of a town and a product that they don't want people anywhere to associate with conflict or tension or anything negative.
4 weeks after Curfews' original motion died, Williams called for the board to reconsider the issue as a committee of the whole. This time, the board agreed.
Well, the whole thing was off the record because there is no record of committee meetings in the Board of Aldermen's minutes. They could bare their souls somewhat. Remember, at that time, there was no such thing as an open meeting law for committees. Only the general meeting of the board was open to the public. So they could talk a lot more freely about a subject like that in a committee of the whole than they ever could in an alderman meeting.
In committee, the board agreed in principle to hire black firemen as long as no white firemen lost their jobs, and only after the city manager reported on what it would cost. City manager Gene Perkins began looking at how the city might bring African Americans into the fire department. 4 months later, drawing on a plan devised in Richmond, he recommended that the city staff the firehouse with 8 black firemen, led by 8 experienced white firemen. In keeping with the segregated norms of the day, Perkins estimated it would cost $3,840 to modify the station to create separate quarters for whites and blacks. On October 9, 1950, the aldermen again considered a motion to hire black firemen. This time, Alderman Guy Folk changed his vote, splitting the board 4-4. Curfews, who only voted in a tie, promptly voted yes. Winston-Salem will be the first city in North Carolina and only the second south of the Mason-Dixon line to integrate its fire department since the Jim Crow era. The next week, the city sent a letter to every member of the fire department seeking volunteers to serve with the black firemen.
The word went out, don't nobody volunteer, and if nobody don't volunteer, then you won't have nobody to train them.
The newspaper reported that a petition was being passed around within the fire department and being signed by most of the white firefighters saying they would not serve with black firefighters. This was addressed to Chief Brown, but it was probably Brown's idea to do this to defeat the proposal for the black firefighters.
He told them doggone it wouldn't work, and but the main thing he told them that he didn't have a man in his fire department. How you gonna train them?
Brown's effort to stonewall the plan was doomed from the start. Behind his back, Curfews had already lined up white firefighters to serve with the African Americans.
See, that's the part that tricked him. See, the hierarchy, the city manager and all of them already picked the men they wanted, and he didn't even know it.
This is a classic case where Mayor Curfews was probably the slicker politician than Chief Brown was, because he knew going in he already had enough white firefighters to make the thing work.
In January 1951, The city announced that it was accepting applications for black firemen. The response was immediate. In 3 days, more than 70 men applied.
Well, I finished college and I was really looking for a job teaching. At that time, you would travel over the state and find out where there were vacancies where you could be hired as a teacher. And I, in the meantime, went to work out here at Twin City Club. And I was down here for lunch one day, waiting down at where the buses all came around, safe buses at that time, around Church Street, 3rd and 4th Street. And that was one of my old friends said, "Hey, you know they're going to hire black firemen." I said, I don't want to be no fireman. That's a dangerous job. He said, "Well, come on." And I went on down to City Hall, and I signed up and went through all the procedures, and I ended up getting the job, and quite a few of those other fellows who had already applied did not.
I didn't think about it until a friend of mine told me that they were getting ready to get some colored firemen. Color was the word.
And we went down there and they had a line coming out of City Hall all the way out to Church Street down the corner. I said, "Man, I'm not getting no lines. I got enough lines when I was in service. I was not getting no lines." And he had some stuff with him, you know. He saw somebody right at the door, went up there and started talking to the guy, you know, and I was standing back on Church Street. He said, and we crashed the line, went right in.
The city chose 8 men: Raphael O'Hara Black, Willie James Carter, Lester Edward Irvin Jr., John Henry Ford, Robert Lindsay Greer, John Franklin Meredith Jr., George Waddell Penn, and John Roy Thomas. Compared to the rank and file in the fire department, they were overqualified. Most were World War II veterans and had gone to college. Their high level of education was just the first of many ways in which they would distinguish themselves in the months and years to come.
February 14, 1951. Mr. Lester Edward Irvin Jr., 235 North Dunleith Avenue, Winston-Salem, North Carolina. Dear Sir, your application for appointment as a member of the Winston-Salem Fire Department has been approved by the Personnel Department. You are hereby notified to report at Fire Station Number 4 on Dunleith Avenue at 7:30 a.m. Thursday, March 1, at which time Chief M.G. Brown and Lieutenant Williams, training officer, will be present to talk to you and give you such instructions as are necessary at that time. Yours very truly, Charles S. Kimmel, Director, Personnel Department, City of Winston-Salem.
The white firemen at Station 4 were packing to move when the new recruits reported for training.
Those guys, they didn't speak to us or anything. We didn't say nothing to them. We just stood along against the wall, and they had that old truck, and they knew that truck was polluted with smoke. So instead of opening the door and cranking the truck up so the smoke would dissipate, they fired that boy up and just smoked us out, you know. The driver, he stepped down on the accelerator so he can make sure that black smoke come out. And they left out.
I got there about 10 minutes past. And everybody was there at the end, but I think Irvin and I, we were the last one. He lived right across the street. So at 7:30, we supposed to have been there. He still wasn't there.
And he came across, strolling across the street, which was kind of comical, you know, right on the dot.
All of us was plumb virgins. We know anything about the fire department. So Lieutenant Williams, at that time, they made him the training officer. And he came over that first morning. They had Lieutenant Williams, Chief Brown, City Manager, Mr. Perkins, and had a little ceremony. And they all left. And we was kind of dressed up like we are today, you know, had on nice suits and everything. So, well, we'll sit around here and talk a little today, but tomorrow now I want you guys, you know, to get you some old clothes. I had some coveralls and everything. Say, well, because you don't need to be clean anymore, because we got a job to do.
Well, I tell you, actually, the training was very hard, and it was very disciplined training. Lieutenant Williams at that time, who had been the training supervisor, he had been in the Navy Department. He had been into some of the naval training, the naval firefighting, and knowing all about fog and some of the other things that were coming to be new procedures in fighting fires.
He believed in doing everything right. He didn't take no shortcuts, and he would take point blank, whatever we do, we're gonna do it the right way and the best way. You see, we're gonna be a top-notch company. That was his determination.
We studied all about chemicals, hydraulics, how to operate the pump and how much pressure you give at the nozzle, just like going to school every day.
The training session that he said had set up, all the book work and everything, we ate that up like it was nothing. Then we started going out in the field, practicing with the old truck and the old hose and everything.
The first opportunity to apply their training came at an open field, where the recruits were to put out an oil fire set in a training pit.
So they dug that pit down on Diggs Boulevard, and they poured oil in there, and then they poured gasoline on top of that. And when they ignited it, it just was a terrible looking flame.
And they got it real hot. We say, when they gonna let us go in? And that thing was up around about 200 feet high. And they said, okay, put it out.
Actually, the water, would lie on top of that, would knock that gasoline, that oil down, but it'd be bubbling, and if you didn't watch it, you move on, then it'd flare up behind you. So, but we had learned how to do that.
And our first group of guys, we went in groups. They knocked that fire out so quick until they lit it again, and we knocked it out again.
And so each time they light it, we attacked that fire, and we put it out. And of course, it was dense. I mean, you can imagine that gasoline and oil burning.
To our amazement, this fire, some sources we heard felt that, what this was going to be. Just watch out today. We got something for them. We'll take care of them today.
We heard all this after our training was over. A group of guys, they didn't want us to pass, so they had rigged that up, to make it a little harder, try to make some of us quit. But we didn't.
That was supposed to have been a turning point for us because they didn't think we had the nerve, but we put that thing out so fast. But anyway, they went back and put this aerial truck up in the yard of old number 4 station.
That was supposed to be a challenge to see if we were bold enough or brave enough to climb the ladder. And of course, they brought the hook and ladder. They call it hook and ladder, and it was an 85-foot ladder on it. And instead of putting it in an angle, they put it straight up and extended it all the way out. And Chief Brown told them that he wanted us to go up one side and down the other side.
And it was pretty scary because the ladder was, as you got up the top, it was swaying 100 feet up.
Most of the guys came down. Some of them, when they got down to the ground, their legs were just shaking from nerve. It was something to see, but everybody was standing waiting to see if we were going to be able to do it.
We knew we had to accomplish what we set out to do, because if we failed, then it's going to go right down the line through the years. There was a big load on our shoulders, a big load, not to mess up.
Because we had 100% support of the black community. They was behind us 100%. So if we had failed, we would have failed them. So that was one of the determinations that we had, that we was not going to fail. We were not going to let them down.
After 6 weeks of training, the firemen took a final written examination. 4 of the 8 had perfect scores. Together, they had an average score of 93. On April 15, 1951, Engine 4 was reactivated. The 8 black rookies were joined by 7 experienced white firemen: Sergeant James A. Cecil, Sergeant Samuel T. Irvin, Sergeant Harry M. Shields, Sergeant Elmo M. Vestal, Sergeant Willie Holcomb, Lieutenant Edgar L. Hatcher, and Captain Raymond A. Overby. The firemen set up housekeeping in a station house that had been modified during their training. A separate bathroom and kitchen were added for the black firemen. Upstairs, separate sleeping areas were designated for whites and blacks. The company continued to use the reserve fire truck that had served the rookies during training. It was the oldest truck in the department and not too reliable.
And the first alarm that we had alarms that I'll never forget. At that time, see, they had the old box alarm system. You know, the boxes on the poles. And that Sunday evening after lunch, we had an alarm coming to 8th and Greenwood.
We got on the tailgate and the truck wouldn't start, so we say, well, let's go, let's go. Say, well, we can't go.
We had to push that truck because the starter wasn't working on it. We had to push it down Dunleaf and put it in gear and crank it, you know, catch it.
And then when we got to 8th and Dunleaf, we had to make a turn, go up 8th Street to Greenwood. It conked out. We didn't make it to our first alarm.
That was very disappointing because I was ready to go. We were ready to go.
The girl was back there beating on his leg. Come on, baby. Telling the truck to go, and the truck wouldn't go.
To start with, we were just answering fires over in the black neighborhood around in East Western, down to Diggs Boulevard and almost at 25th Street. Because beyond that, you had a lot of white families still in over there. And number 3 station was answering a lot of calls and white families. Sometimes, occasionally, they would send us by night over there to an automobile fire or something.
We were confined to basically the black section, which was where all the fires were in the first place because of the ghetto and the rundown houses. But once in a while, the fires would happen in other districts and they would get out of control. And we would listen to the monitors.
They had a chemical fire on Wartown Street. They had drums of chemical was blowing up over there and they were shooting up about 50 feet in the air. And of course, we standing there outside mad because we couldn't go to the fire with all them drums on it. So Murder said, y'all crazy. Said, let them go on over there. Said, I don't want to go over there on that type of fire, no way.
And we were sitting there in the station and listening to the monitors, you know, and all the white firemen over there fighting fire. We say, hey, why come they don't send us?
Finally, they called, the alarm went off. It said, send number 4. Well, before we left, Raymond over said, well, looking from here, he said, when we get there, he said, don't pull off no 1.5-inch holes. He said, I want 2 2.5-inch holes off this truck.
Drums was exploding in the air and all of that, but we went in there and we helped put that fire out.
The other firemen that was on the scene, they were using 1.5 inch. So when we got there, we knew that we were going to use 2.5. So we put that fire out.
And the newspaper people come over there, you know, and gave us all the exposure. They had on the front page, number 4 company, baptism of fire, I'll never forget. And I found out that the operator that sent us over there got in trouble because he didn't want us to go nowhere.
And when we went on that, from that day on, it was always number 4 because we had established ourselves as being such aggressive firemen until the other fire companies enjoyed when they would see us coming.
And well, we thought that was great, you know, because that meant that we were doing a good job and made each of us feel very good.
The men of Engine 4 had proved their worthiness in the eyes of white fire companies, but this did not mean that they were accepted as equals. If anything, white companies started taking advantage of Engine 4. On more than one occasion, number 4 would be the first called out to back up another company and the last to be relieved. The white members of Engine 4, in particular, were ostracized and harassed by other whites.
They came over voluntarily to train the colored guys, and they were humiliated and said everything to them, you know. You love black guys, which is not the expression. And they had to be humiliated going through all of that.
Some of us asked to leave the church. And these are facts. They were asked to leave the church, and a lot of the association and friendship that they had with other fellows in the fire department, that had a conflict. But they stuck with us.
The rough times back there that a lot of the firemen were giving them, they were kind of, you know, they go somewhere, they just wouldn't speak to them. And I guess, you know, it was something new, and everybody, when you try things new, you get scared. And when you get scared, you do change, you do some crazy things.
Hey, they were in the same boat we were in. They were ostracized. And Chief was going to fire all of them if he could.
The thing that really, I think, made a difference was their attitude. They came in determined that the idea was going to work, and they worked very hard to see to it that it worked.
Well, my father was from up north, and he took people, you know, at their value, face value. You know, you do him right, he'll do you right. He was just one of them people, and I believe every one of them that went over there at volunteer was the same way.
Captain Overby set the tone from the start. He was 41 years old and had been with the fire department 10 years. Before joining the department, he had been a shoe salesman.
Raymond Over was the type of person that if he felt that we were mistreated, he would go over the chief's head and go to the city manager. And that's how we accomplished a lot of things, by the fact that he was strong enough and had the willpower to override the chief, which was basically, that's subject to be fired.
We could all sit and we could enjoy things, and we could, in many instances, talk about things and have laughs about things, or we could even go over some of our mistakes. And it wasn't a real hard thing that he was doing, but he'd just tell you what you did and what you didn't do right, and what he was proud of and what he wasn't proud of.
Our chief was our major problem. He didn't like the idea from the very beginning. He always stated that it wouldn't work, and for several months, he wouldn't come in the fire station. We'd have meetings on that, you know, we'd say, let's don't get discouraged. Let's just continue to work together, do our job, and do the best we can. And that was Raymond Over's, that was his teaching. We are going to do our job. To begin with, it was basically separate. There's no such thing as separate but equal, but we had different bathrooms, kitchen, water fountains, eating facilities. Everything was bedrooms, and everything was totally separated. And through our working together and working and understanding each other, little by little we began to sort of move in with just each other.
They're the ones suggested, this is stupid. Why 2 kitchens?
One day, Raymond Overby, Captain Overby, we were all sitting there in class, and he just came up that day, he said, this don't make no sense. He said, there's no need of you all cooking back there and us cooking up here, we eating in here and you all eating back there. He said, why don't we just cook one meal and sit down and eat together? Well, the idea sounded good, but they forgot Chief Brown did not lack no integration whatsoever. And so, and by chance, one day he came over there. We were all in one kitchen, sitting down and eating, and just having a good time. And he came in, he wanted to know, he said, what is going on here?
It wasn't a pleasant reaction, that's for sure, you know. He called them off, and I guess he talked his language to it. He talked his language to them that he talks, you know, and you could see the expression on the guys' faces after he got through talking to them, you know.
He threatened to fire Raymond Overby right there on the spot. And of course, there again, Raymond Overby went down to the city manager, explained to him what was going on, and of course, now the city manager sort of slow walked that. He said, well, just sort of take it easy. He said, let's don't intimidate him. He said, let's just work with this real easy. And he said, little by little, gradually, he said, we'll work this out.
The first fatality we had was I don't know what street, but after the fire, we found this man sitting in a chair, just sitting there. And really, he died from smoke inhalation. But that was our first fatality, and then I'll never forget that. His name was Fisher. So we didn't sleep that night. That was our first fatality.
In the wintertime, see, we had fire because most people use wood and coal. And when it get cold, you're trying to keep it cold. See, you put a good fire in that daggone stove, see, sooner or later, and that's what would happen.
We had a fire in one of those shotgun houses. We've been studying about backdraft, but that's the first backdraft that we experienced. John Meredith and I, we went to the door. Instead of, our training says, feel the door and look in the window. If you see it mushrooming and very incombustible, churning and everything, we didn't do that. We wanted the fire out, so when John kicked the door in, that's when it hit us, and it blew us from the door out in the middle of the street. I still had my helmet on, and I was singed around my helmet because the hair was locked under my chin. I didn't have no hair around my helmet. I had a mustache, which I didn't have no more, no eyebrows, no eyelashes. And if I remember right, they said that my instinct, after we hit the ground out there in the street, I was covering John up, protecting him.
I remember one fire, we went all the way from 2nd Street all the way to South Side, and they were out with a line throwing water into a window, so we got there, and we went on in the front door and crawled all the way to the back and put that fire out and came back out.
The quicker you can get where the fire's burning, the quicker you can put it out. And most of the time, if you can get inside to put it out, you can put it out. You stand outside and start throwing water through windows and doors, then it's going to burn to you.
We didn't feel like we were going to just back up on anything, and to back off, even when it was necessary, you know, you always felt bad about it to a large extent, because that's the way we felt about it. And we were our own worst critics. No one had to tell me or anyone else what I didn't do or what I should have done, because we always were striving to do our best.
We go on a fire. We come back. The next day that we'd have class, and the class was about this fire. Now, what did we do that we shouldn't have done, and what could we have done that was better? And step by step, from the time we pulled up to the scene, fire scene, until we start taking up, we go through every step. And if there was anything in there where that we could have done differently or better, that was what our class was on.
We had to be better. We had to be better than the white boys, you know? I don't know why, but we just had to be. So we were better by training and studying hard.
Even as the men in Engine 4 were fighting to be accepted by white fire companies, they were also trying to fit in the neighborhood on Dunleith Avenue. This time, they ran into less resistance. Again, Raymond Overby set the tone.
He was a lack of a person. People would come in the station, he'd welcome into the station, talk to them. Sometimes we walk out the street in the yard and stay out and wave at people.
Coming from what we consider a working class neighborhood, they were out on that pavement every morning, and they watched us lock the doors and head for Columbia Heights Elementary School or to Anderson High School. And they were there in the afternoon when you returned.
When we would go out on a lawn, those neighbors knew that we were in the process of fixing dinner. They would come in, turn the stove off, set the pots off the stove, and take care of things.
Everybody felt comfortable talking to them about good times, bad times. how are your children, how's college for so-and-so, how are they doing in their classroom work, or are you keeping your grades up? I just think that they made a difference because they really cared about this neighborhood.
We played with the kids football and everything else, doing intervals between alarms, and those kids 16 and 15 and 16-year-old was big as we were, and they would tear us up, out there on the lawn.
Well, at Christmas time, they would take the fire engine out, go Christmas caroling, and we would go with it, following in cars and everything. And we'd go all over in their area around East Winston and all.
And one of the things that they used to do was to distribute toys during Christmas. So on more than one occasion, freezing, but most exciting, riding on the fire truck through the neighborhoods, passing out toys to, disadvantaged children.
And then we would come back to the fire station. And then a lot of the neighbors had, plus I guess the firemen families had brought food, and when they'd open them doors up, the whole inside of Engine 4 was just covered with food.
I tell you what, 1951 World Series time, which is getting close to right now. There's a guy downtown, and his name Robert Scales. He ran a pool room, he had a bonding business, he was in real estate, kind of well-to-do. He came over there that week. I knew him, and I carried him upstairs, showed him all around his back and everything, and we standing out there talking, and he said, he knew I played baseball, because he had come to see me. I played with the local team, then the Pontiac, He said, how you gonna watch the World Series? I said, where y'all TV? TV? Nobody had no TV. We don't have no TV. And he just pumped in, asked me, he said, y'all want TV? And I said, yeah. I didn't know what it meant. And that evening, the daggone truck rolled up over there, TV. The man got up on top of the station, put that antenna. We had the best reception in East Winston.
It wasn't no colored seats and white seats. We all sat there and enjoyed all the old shows that would come in then.
They come up, and Kaplan, he let them come up and sit around and watch TV. And then a lot of the guys, when they was off, they come back at night, because then nobody want to have one at home, not in 51.
But the TV could not be turned on until in the afternoons after all the classroom work and everything had been done. So we sat there in the living room to watch TV. But if Lieutenant Hatcher was on, we couldn't watch but one program. That was I Love Lucy. It didn't care what was on TV. If Lieutenant Hatcher worked, you couldn't see nothing but I Love Lucy, because he gonna sit right there and watch Lucy until it go off. So we just decided that TV really was no good to us. It was more or less Lieutenant Hatcher's TV.
In 1951, 8 African-American firemen and 7 white firemen had flouted social conventions and achieved the unthinkable, a truly integrated firehouse. On Dunleith Avenue in Winston-Salem, black men and white men had torn down the barriers of segregation. They lived and worked together. The city had never intended this to happen, nor was it ready to follow their example. Instead, it was slowly resegregating Engine 4. This had been the plan from the start. As the original black firemen gained experience, they would replace the white firemen at the station. Elmo Vestal was the first to leave. He was replaced by Robert Newland, who joined Engine 4 on July 1st, 1953. On January 1st, 1955, the first 2 black firemen were promoted on the basis of a competitive exam. Lester Irvin and Ralph Black became the city's first black fire sergeants. By then, the company had lost George Penn and Hank Ford.
We did lose a couple of guys. They had to be discharged because of conduct. Things happen. But we had to be even off duty, We had to watch ourselves because the life you live, even after you leave the firehouse, people were still watching you. So our conduct had to be more of an upgrade.
We lost those two, and that left the 6 of us. And it was sort of sad to see them go under the circumstances, but it wasn't because it wasn't an effort made to save them, because it was on everybody's part. Raymond Overby, Lieutenant Hatchett, and everybody did everything they could to try to save them.
By 1957, Captain Raymond Overby was the only white left. By then, it was clear who would become the city's first black fire captain. The issue had been decided when Lieutenant Ed Hatcher, the second in command, left. The candidates to replace him were Lester Irvin and Ralph Black.
One of the advantages that Lester Irvin had coming into the fire department was the fact that he had finished Virginia State with a business administration degree. That gave him an advantage over most of us. Plus the fact he lived right in front of the fire station. So the first thought came there, Raymond Overby, which was the captain of the station. His first thought was, well, this will make a good man because he can see out the station by the fact that he lived right at the station. And I guess that was the beginning of Irvin being the first officer.
On June 16, 1957, Lester Irvin was promoted to captain. He was the first African American in the Mid-South to be promoted to that rank and lead a fire company. Raphael Black was promoted to lieutenant. As an all-black company, the men of Engine 4 faced new challenges. Among them, continued hostility from white firemen.
Chief Brown knew that we would talk among ourselves, and I got to bring this up because it happened, but some kind of way he had that fire station bugged.
We was out there one day giving Chief Gibson. We were giving him pure hell. And next thing we know, Chief Gibson pulls up out there in the yard. Murder said, y'all been out there talking about Chief Gibson, haven't you? I said, no, man. He said, yeah, you have. He said, I bet you. He said, that's why he over here. Sure enough, it was. So it wasn't a bug, it was that phone, it was two-way, but Meredith was the first one detected. He kept saying, he said, it's something ain't right. This is the word he used. It's something ain't right about this phone.
I come to find out later that the operator downtown could maybe switch and listen in. And a lot of times we'd been around there talking about things that you didn't want heard.
But I don't think it was set up to eavesdrop or anything. I just think that's the way it was. When they put it in operation, that's the way it was.
One day, the fire phone rang and it stopped. And so it rang again, so we picked up and they told us where the fire was. Well, when we got ready to go to the fire, the truck wouldn't crank. We tried, the truck wouldn't crank. So I don't know whether it was Hatchett or somebody. Hatchett picked the phone up and called and said, well, you're gonna have to send another company. Said, the truck won't crank. And the operator told him, said, yeah. Said, I heard y'all trying to crank the truck. Now, he heard us trying to crank the truck, but the phone was hung up. John Murdy's first thing he said, I told y'all this place was bugged.
Later, it served a good purpose, because you could say what you wanted him to hear.
We get right by the phone and send every message. What we wanted to go straight downtown, that's we knew how to do. We knew how to do it.
For 10 years, Engine 4 would be an all-black fire company. Their aggressive firefighting skills won them the respect, if not the full acceptance, of their white counterparts. And yet, when the urban riots that swept the nation in 1967 reached Winston-Salem, other black residents were quick to identify them with the white establishment.
The riots of '67 was tough going. We had so many fires our hose never got dry. We didn't get any sleep, and we had to answer calls all over town, and that was just one of those times that we'd answer uptown, south side, east side, anywhere that they need us, and that was an all day, all night ordeal.
One night we were going down on the other cross down near George's warehouse, which was on Chester Street down there from downtown. As we turned the corner on our way there, we had to come through a section where they had some black folk on the corner raising sand at us. Because at that time, I wasn't black no more. I was part of, I guess, the establishment. They said, we'll get you for the night going or something like that. You know, I don't know what they say, but anyway.
Most problem that we had was in the Happy Hill section, when they said Tuttle Lumber Company afire. And there was a house on the corner, and we didn't know it, but when we pulled the hose off and everything, we were fighting the fire across the street in the lumberyard. Somebody was up in the upstairs window, shooting at us. And I never forget, Ralph Black was on duty that night with us. So they had him pinned down, just like comeback. So I go under the truck. So by that time, a Jeep of National Guards pulled up and they said, "What's the problem?" I said, "There's somebody up there in that house shooting." And buddy, they jumped out, about 6 of them jumped out, and they hit that front door. And went out there, they brought 4 of them out there with their hands up with the guns and everything. And everybody talking about shoot them, because they were shooting at us so bad. I mean, it was terrible.
Lester Williams, the man who had trained the black firemen in 1951, was serving as chief when the riots broke out. The violence had forced him to delay a sweeping change he had been planning for his department. When order was restored, he put his plan into action and ordered the integration of all 9 fire stations in the city. To do this, he broke up the tight-knit group of black firemen in Engine 4 and sent them in 1s and 2s to other stations.
Carter and Greer stayed at number 4, and they were cadre to train other white firemen that came into number 4.
At that time, we were 2 sergeants. They left us there and took everybody else away. Now we got a company now though with we had a 12-man company then. We got 10 whites and 2 blacks.
You had to speak a certain language to certain people, and I think these white guys was kind of scared. In other words, that's why they left Chick and me, because we would get the job done. But one incident happened that after the fire, you're supposed to give information about insurance, who owns the house and all of that. And as the captain was taking down the notes, and the assistant chief Casey at that time, and it was real cold, and Chick and I, after the fire, you have nothing to warm you up, and it's real cold. It's about 7 degrees below zero at that time. And we were ready to go, let's go home. But anyway, this guy he was about half drunk, and the captain was like, well, what's your name? He was like, you cuss, you don't know my name. I ain't gonna tell you my name. But anyway, we get down there freezing, and Chick, this is why they left us there. Chick say, "Man, blank, 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 tell the man your blank, blank names. Let's go." I'm not going to say that. But anyway, I think we were left for that reason.
I think that the idea to move us and spread us out throughout the department was a good idea. Because that way, what you're doing, you're not just have one integrated station, you have an integrated department.
When Mayor Marshall Curfews cast the deciding vote, Winston-Salem became the first city in North Carolina since the Jim Crow era to hire black American firemen. Curfews, the political gadfly and populist, would remain mayor until 1961. His 12-year administration was the longest in city history and would come to be regarded as one of its best. Kenneth R. Williams, the alderman who pushed to have firemen hired, did not seek re-election and left office 8 months after they went on the job. In 1962, he became president of Winston-Salem Teachers College and led it to become part of the University of North Carolina system. Raymond Overby remained a captain until he retired in 1973, having served 32 years. He died in 1979 at the age of 68. John Meredith remained a fearless firefighter, but eventually his exploits caught up with him. He retired on disability in 1973 and died a year later at the age of 50. Roy Thomas and Robert Greer stayed with the department for 32 years. They retired as fire engineers in 1982. Chick Carter served until 1986 and retired as a fire captain, having served 35 years. Ralph Black retired in 1985 as a district fire chief, overseeing 6 fire companies. Lester Irvin, Engine 4's first black captain, continued to set precedents throughout his career, leading to his appointment in 1980 as chief of the fire department. As chief, he modernized the department's administration and command structure. When he retired in 1989, he had served the fire department for 38 years. In 1980, Engine 4 moved to a new firehouse 2 blocks away. After Irvin died in 1997, the station was renamed in his honor. The original number 4 is still standing on Dunleith Avenue. Today it is used as a church. A marker outside the station honors the men who integrated Engine 4 in the events of 1951.
We had the integration come in 10 or 12 years later, as far as Martin Luther King and the sit-ins and all this other stuff. But these things that happened at number 4 station was long before this ever even occurred.
We saw this is going to be the future for the other guys that's coming along. And they're having it good, really. And I hope they can remember from whence they come from.
50 years later, those things are remarkable when you look back at the time that they were done and how they were accomplished.
When they picked those men to go in that station, they probably don't know how lucky when the city picked them, how good they actually picked people. Because they were people that would take and run with it.
What this story shows is just how when you put people together and they have a common goal, which is to fight fires and to be professionals, they don't need those kinds of vestiges of separation and segregation.
And they're not worried about who's standing next to them because it's all about meeting the beast and beating it. And that's what they did at Engine 4.
Very few people have an opportunity to go through a situation like that. And a lot of people read about situations. You read about how things took place, this place and that place. But right here in Winston-Salem, it existed, it happened, and it worked. And it is history. I look at it as history being made. It was being made because so many were against the idea, and it kept saying that it wouldn't work. We proved them wrong. It did work.
Say don't. Listen, I'm down on bended knees, giving thanks to you for delivering me and all the things you do. Lord, I'm tired, but I must succeed. Even when the fire of life is raging all around me. Please, Father, hear me. Don't let my work be in vain. Yeah. Even when I stumble, and even Sometimes I do, yeah. Through